The senator from California.
Mr. President, I listened with interest to the senator's explanation of the cross-air rule, and I would just say he is off the mark, because if you produce deadly pollution in your state, deadly, you have an obligation to clean it up before it goes into another state. It's like taking your garbage and dumping it in your neighbor's, front lawn. We don't do that in America. So we're going to have a robust debate next week on the cross-air rule, but I would hope people would keep in mind we're talking about deadly pollution produced in one state, series of states, moving over to a series of other states who have no defense. And so anyone who wants to come here and claim that that's the right thing to do morally, just walk away from that rule, I think they're going to have a hard time explaining it back home. I would not dump garbage on the front lawn of my neighbor's house. And I think that, Bettina, is the best explanation of what this is about. But more on that later. Today we're going to be facing a very interesting choice. As we know, President Obama has put together a major jobs package, and he pays for it by going to the millionaires and saying, once you make $1 million, after that, we think you could pay just a little bit more to help us get out of this recession. And my Republican friends voted that down. They were just appalled that we would even suggest that there be, even a few dollars of increased taxes on people who make over $1 million. They would rather not do any job creation and protect the people who earn over $1 million. So we have a very stark choice today. We have a small version of the jobs bill. This one focuses on infrastructure, mostly transportation investments, paid for by a 0.7% tax on people who earn over $1 million, and would not go into effect on any of those funds until you've passed the million. So it would be taxed 0.7% on income over $1 million. I make that point because it is not going to hurt anybody. A person making $1.5 million would pay an additional $3,000. This is not anything that's going to hurt the millionaires and the billionaires. It's going to make this country stronger. It's going to grow this economy. So here's what we have. We have a Democratic jobs bill. It's $60 billion, $50 billion for roads and bridges, and $10 billion for an infrastructure bank. To put that into the context of why this is such a good bill and why it would create 650,000 jobs, let me tell you what it is in essence doing. It is taking an extra year of transportation funding. We spend about $50 billion a year, approximately, through the Highway Trust Fund, and it would inject essentially another year of spending over the next 12 months, creating well over 650,000 new jobs. What the Republican alternative does is actually lose jobs. What they do is they say they will continue the Highway Trust Fund for 2 years, so they're just continuing on what we're already doing. That's great. But then they cut the equivalent amount from police, fire, food inspection, FBI, and it will result in a loss of many jobs, 200,000 jobs. So you have one bill, the Democratic bill, that creates a minimum of 650,000 jobs, and you have the Republican bill that cuts 200,000 jobs. What are they thinking, Mr. President? What are they thinking? This is not the time to cut 200,000 jobs. And then they end the health reform, which we all know, while not perfect, is going to help our deficit, reduce our deficit. So what they've done is they continue the highway spending at current levels, doesn't add one job. Then they cut all those other jobs to pay for it, 200,000 jobs, and then they repeal health reform, which is going to add to the deficit. They cannot stand the thought of a billionaire paying a little bit more to help us at this time, even though everybody knows we're at a point in time where the gap between the wealthiest and the middle class has never been bigger. Mr. President, 400 families earn more than 50% of all the rest of us. 400 families earn more than 50% of all the rest of us. It is unbelievable. Now, my state has many wealthy people in it, many poor people in it, and a good middle class. But it's getting tougher to be part of that middle class. The middle class is hit hard with health costs. They're hit hard with college costs that keep going up. They're hit hard with gas prices going up. They're hit hard from mortgages that they can't refinance because their mortgage is now higher than their home is worth. So we have to act here on these issues, and we have the ability to do it. If we just read the preamble of our Constitution, it tells us what we're supposed to do. Work for a more perfect union, establish justice, domestic tranquility, promote the general welfare. We have to do these things today because we're losing the middle class. And this bill that's before us, the Democratic Jobs Bill, is an excellent place to start this very day by infusing $60 billion into spending that will go mostly to private sector contractors, people who build the roads, build the bridges. Do you know, Mr. President, that 70,000 bridges in America are deficient? 70,000 bridges in America are deficient. My colleague, Senator Inhofe, and I are working very closely on a highway bill. We're going to have one for you soon. And he tells the story of a woman walking in Oklahoma, and she's just simply taking a walk, and a bridge starts to fall apart and falls down and traps her and kills her. And he says she was a young mother. You know, this is America in the 21st century. That is not acceptable. You can't have a country like ours neglect its infrastructure. It's wrong. But our Republican friends won't work with us because they don't want to ask people earning over $1 million to pay just a little bit more. For example, if someone makes $1.1 million, they'll have to pay $700 more in their taxes. That's it. But they don't even want to go there. What they want to do is say, oh yeah, we'll just renew the highway bill, but we will slash across the board everything but defense, they said. And that's how we're going to pay, they said, for their jobs bill, which actually will lose hundreds of thousands of jobs. It's unbelievable to me. I don't think this is the time to say we'll turn our backs on jobs. As a matter of fact, in order to extend the Highway Trust Fund, we're going to fire cops, firefighters, food safety inspectors, FBI agents, and Border Patrol agents. That's what their alternative is. So don't vote for it unless you think it's the time to put firefighters out of work and cops and food safety inspectors and FBI agents and Border Patrol agents. Now, the other thing the Republicans do in this so-called jobs bill of theirs, which is a no-jobs bill, it's a jobs loss bill, is they decide they want to block implementation of very important health and safety rules. And I want to go through what those rules are. And we're going to talk about the Clean Air Act right now. Where's the stuff on that? What they're cutting, what they're repealing. Well, where is that in here? The Republicans are repealing 2 rules that deal with clean air. And here's the thing. It's going to make people sicker. It's going to mean loss of jobs in clean tech. It's the last thing the country needs, and it flies in the face of the views of the people. Let's talk about one of the rules they want to cut back: industrial boilers and incinerators. This bill, called a jobs bill, would halt an EPA rule issued in February 2011 to reduce toxic air pollution. Toxic air pollution. What do I mean? Toxic means it's toxic to your health. It will hurt you. People will die from toxic air pollution. People do die from toxic air pollution. The toxins that the boiler and incinerator rule would reduce include mercury, lead, and other hazardous air pollutants released by boilers and incinerators. And let me tell you, they can write it the way they want it, but here's what happens when we go back to those days when we allowed these toxins to be emitted. We saw developmental disabilities in our children. We saw more cases of cancer, more cases of heart disease, aggravated asthma, and premature death. These aren't just words. Congress commissioned a study, and we now know exactly what we're doing and how many lives it saves and how many visits to the hospital it saves. And let me remind my friends who think that it's good for the economy to have toxic air pollution that if you can't breathe, you can't work. If you have to rush to the hospital because your kid is rushed there because of an asthma attack, you lose a day's work. If you're a pregnant woman and now you have a problem with the child and the child is disabled or has problems mentally from too much mercury, this is a tragedy. So people say, oh, the EPA, they're regulating too much and it costs too much. Let me tell you the price of the Republican agenda: sick people, loss of jobs in the clean tech industry, loss of days' work, loss of kids' school days. I would urge my colleagues in the Senate, both parties, when you have your next meeting with a large group of people, whether it's 100 people, 50 people, or a couple, just ask them how many have asthma. Ask them how many know someone close to them with asthma. I guarantee you that a third to half of the room, hands will go up. Now, that doesn't just happen, asthma, because you just woke up on the wrong side of the bed. It happens because of the air you're breathing. And it's toxic. But in this so-called jobs bill, which I already told you loses jobs, They not only do that, but to add insult to injury, they repeal all these rules. Now, let me put it into context for you, since I've now spoken emotionally about what it does to people when they breathe in toxins. Let me give you the numbers. When Congress demanded a study, we said, give us the numbers, and a study was done. We believe that the protections from this industrial boiler rule will annually prevent up to 6,500 premature deaths, 4,000 heart attacks, 4,300 hospital emergency room visits, 310,000 days when people miss work or school, and 41,000 cases of aggravated asthma. The benefits from these safeguards are expected to be $54 billion annually by 2014. That's the rule my Republican colleagues want us to set aside. If you went up to your constituency and you said to them, you know, we have a rule here, and industry's going to have to use the best available technology and clean up their pollution, and here's what it's going to do. It's going to prevent 6,500 premature deaths, 4,000 heart attacks, 4,300 hospital visits, 310,000 days when people miss school, 41,000 cases of aggravated asthma, and it's going to deliver $54 billion a year in benefits, health benefits. I think your constituent would say, go for it, Senator. That makes sense. And let me show you a poll that just came out that shows you what the people, how the people feel about this. We have it? Okay. Now listen to this. You've got my Republican friends offering what they call a jobs bill, which I've just proved to you is job cuts, because they just simply continue the Highway Trust Fund. They don't add any news, but they cut a couple of 100,000 jobs to pay for it, okay? And that's their so-called jobs bill. Then they want to repeal two rules that fall under the Clean Air Act. And I just talked to you about the boiler rule. But let me tell you what the people think, since we are supposed to represent the people. There was a bipartisan poll done in October, which is just a few days away. 88% of Democrats, 85% of independents, and 58% of Republicans oppose Congress stopping the EPA from enacting new limits on air pollution from power plants. Who is speaking for the people? We need to vote down the Republican alternative, because 88% of Democrats want us to, 85% of independents want us to, and 58% of Republicans want us. They don't want Congress stepping in. Then Tuesday, Senator Paul is going to have a motion to repeal the cross-state air pollution rule, which is a rule that says to your state, you know what? If you're creating toxic air pollution and it's flowing to another state, you got to clean up your act. 67% of voters support the cross-state air pollution rule, and 77% of voters support the mercury toxic rule. Is that the other rule that they're repealing? What's the other one that they're repealing? Okay. 65% of voters surveyed are confident that the health and environmental benefits of air pollution standards outweigh the costs, and 75% of voters believe a compelling reason to implement these air rules is the boost to local economies and thousands of new jobs that are created from investments in new technologies. So if we are representing the people of these great United States, we better listen to what they're saying in a bipartisan way. They're telling us to leave the EPA alone. People come to this floor, they demonize the EPA. They are going against the belief of the American people. There are some incredible quotes. Do we have the study? Do we have the study on us that we just... Yes, thank you, Grant. I want to read a couple of quotes because, to me, it's amazing what's happening around here. And when I get to the place here, I want to give you some quotes from unlikely sources, and I'd ask how many minutes we have on our side.
You're down to 14 minutes and 10 seconds.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Here's a quote from General Motors. General Motors Company recognizes the benefit of the country continuing the historic national program to address fuel economy and greenhouse gases that the EPA began. That's signed by the chairman and CEO of General Motors. A whole group of electric companies, electricity producing companies, PG&E, Calpine, Next Extra, Public Service Enterprise Group, National Grid, Exelon, Constellation Energy, Austin Energy, wrote a letter to the Wall Street Journal. Our company's experience complying with air quality regs demonstrates that regulations can yield important economic benefits, including job creation, while maintaining reliability. Kind of amazing. And Gerald Ford, a Republican president, who signed the Safe Drinking Water Act in 1974, that's under attack too, by the way, he said, nothing is more essential to the life of every single American than clean air, pure food, and safe drinking water. Yet if you look at the Republican plan, they roll back clean air regulations, they roll back food safety. Even after we had dozens of people die from contaminated cantaloupe, my friends on the other side think it's the time now to cut back on food safety inspection. Give me a break. Who are we here representing? That's why people across the country are upset. They see things like this and they say, is this Alice in Wonderland? Listen to what Christy Todd Whitman and William Ruckelshaus wrote, two Republicans who were former EPA administrators under Republican presidents. They said, and I quote, "It is easy to forget how far we've come in the past 40 years. We should take heart from all this progress and not, as some in Congress have suggested, seek to tear down the agency that the president and Congress created to protect America's health and environment." They wrote that letter in March of this year. They understand this isn't a partisan issue. Republicans breathe the same air that Democrats breathe, and independents also share the air. And that's why it's so frustrating to see in a so-called jobs bill from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle actual loss of jobs and loss of clean air regulations and loss of food safety inspectors. And I have to say, I find myself quoting Richard Nixon more and more. Listen to what he said when he signed at the State of the Union, and he signed the Clean Air Act. He said, clean air, clean water, open spaces, these should once again be the birthright of every American. So I've given you the quotes from Republican presidents and Republican administrators, former administrators of the EPA. I am stunned at this so-called jobs bill. So I talked about the industrial boiler rule. They also rolled back the cement manufacturing facilities rule. It would indefinitely delay standards to address smog and toxic soot pollution from over 150 cement kilns nationwide. These facilities contain hazardous air pollutants, including mercury, arsenic, lead, and other heavy metals. Remember the movie Arsenic and Old Lace? Arsenic kills you. Too much of it does that. Come on, we need to clean up the air. We need to be sure we do it in a reasonable way, and I'm on that side. Do it in a reasonable way. No one could be more reasonable than Lisa Jackson. I'll tell you, the woman has the patience of a saint. She is not going to go out and hit people over the head with this. She's going to phase in these regulations. She's going to listen carefully. You have to listen. Mercury, arsenic, lead, and other heavy metals, and they are the third largest mercury source in the country, cement manufacturing. Let me tell you what these pollutants do. They cause cancer. They harm the reproductive system and the developmental system. Pregnant women and children are at risk. We hear a lot of talk about life. When does, life begin? That's up to each individual and their God to decide that. But one thing I hope we could agree on is a pregnant woman shouldn't be subjected to too much mercury, too much arsenic in the air. So we have a rule here, a reduction of mercury and toxic soot emissions. We know that rule will prevent 2,500 premature deaths, 1,500 heart attacks, 1,700 emergency room and hospital visits. It will prevent 17,000 cases of aggravated asthma attacks, 130,000 days of lost work, and it will provide up to $18 billion of benefits annually by 2013, a benefit-to-cost ratio of 19-to-1. And yet, my friends on the other side think it's a terrible idea and want to indefinitely delay it. Let me tell you something. If we had that kind of attitude in Congress years before, we wouldn't have a Clean Air Act. And I could tell you what happened in Los Angeles. We used to have about 160 days in Los Angeles where people could not go out. They were warned to stay indoors. As a result of the Clean Air Act now, we had none of those days, none, in Los Angeles in 2010. So why on earth does anyone want to delay these rules? You want to sit with Lisa Jackson and sit with me as the chairman of the Environment Committee and sit with others and see a way that we can do this in a fair manner? Of course. But the public wants us to act. And the action they want us to take is to support the EPA, not to put our nose in there and stop them from doing what the Clean Air Act requires them to do. Poll after poll shows that voters are on the side of clean air. They're on the side of protecting public health. They are not on the side of polluters. So I would just like to say, if there's one thing we know today, we know two things. People want jobs, and they also want their health protected. And we also know that when you protect the people's health, what happens is a huge economic boost is given to the clean tech sector, and that boost has resulted in many, many jobs. 1.7 million jobs are created because of these clean air rules, clean water rules. And the whole world wants these technologies. I had the amazing experience of visiting China. I didn't see the sun. For the 7 days or so that I was there. The air is filthy, and people complain about it. One day, we had the hint of sun breaking through the pollution. And the people there said, "What a beautiful day, you must have brought the good weather." I said, "You know what, come to California, I'll show you blue sky." We cannot go backwards. We need to move this country forward. If the arc of history bends towards justice, it also bends toward health, public health, making sure our people get that health care, that they don't have those public health enemies out there, the soot, the arsenic, the lead, the mercury, and yes, jobs. We have seen our GDP explode since we passed the Clean Air Act, and we grew more than any other industrialized nation while we had these laws in place for two reasons. One, these laws create clean tech jobs. Two, if you can't breathe, you can't work. And when you have a healthy society, you're far more productive. So you have the Democratic alternative that will create over 600,000 jobs in transportation. It doesn't go into these extraneous issues, such as the air pollution laws. And then you have, and it's paid for by 0.7% on income over $1 million. And then you have the Republican alternative that just continues our transportation at the same levels and pays for it by cutting 200,000 jobs, police, fire, and the rest, FBI agents, food safety inspectors, Border Patrol agents, just what we don't need. That's what they do. Plus, just for good measure, they repeal, basically, 2 Clean Air Act rules that I talked about, from boilers and cement plants. Folks, if ever there was a difference between the parties in evidence, this is it. If one person comes up to me and says, is there really a difference between Democrats and Republicans? I will point them to this debate. And so I hope very much that we will get enough votes to take up the Democratic bill that is fully paid for and will create over 600,000 jobs, that will fix our deficient bridges and our deficient highways, that will really say to the construction workers, we know you're out of work, and we're going to put you back to work. Or the Republican alternative that would result in 200,000 jobs lost and overturning these clean air rules that are so important that the vast majority of people, including Republicans who are asked about it, say, Congress, keep your hands off these rules because you know what? We think they're working. I thank you very much. I would reserve the balance for other speakers. Thank you very much. I yield the floor.